the solicitor, read the will on a Thursday, and by Friday morning her uncle had already changed the locks. Audra Pemfield stood in the entrance hall of what had been her father's house. Her house, if the law had worked the way it was supposed to, and watched a man she did not recognize carry her mother's writing desk through the front door. She did not say anything. She had learned, in the 6 months since her father's death, that saying things accomplished very little when the person you were speaking to had already decided you did not matter. Her uncle, Roland Pemfield, stood near the window with his hands folded behind his back. He was her father's younger brother, a man who had visited perhaps 4 times in Audra's life, and each time had looked at the house the way a person looks at something they intend to have eventually. "You'll want to make arrangements," he said, without turning around. "Arrangements," she repeated. "For your things, whatever is personal. The furniture and the rest belong to the estate now." He paused. As determined by the court had determined many things in the past 6 months. It had determined that the will her father signed in the last weeks of his illness, the one that left everything to Roland, was valid, despite the fact that her father had been barely conscious when he signed it. It had determined that the earlier will, the one that left Pemfield House and its contents to Audra, could not be located. It had determined, in the quiet way courts determined such things, that a young woman of 23, with no money and no husband and no brother to speak for her, was not a compelling enough reason to delay the transfer of property. She left the next morning with two trunks and a small case of books her father had given her the year before he got sick. She left the portrait of her mother in the upstairs hall, because Roland had been standing nearby when she tried to take it down, and something in his expression told her he would make it difficult. She did not cry until she was in the hired carriage, and even then she kept her face turned toward the window so the driver would not see. She had 3 options, as far as she could tell. The first was to go to her mother's cousin in Bath, a woman named Mrs. Alderton, who was kind in letters and might be kind in person, but who also had 5 children and a husband whose health was uncertain, and who could not reasonably be expected to house a grown woman indefinitely. The second was to find a position somewhere, as a governess, perhaps, or a companion. She had enough education for it. Her father had seen to that, at least. But positions took time to find, and she had very little money and no place to stay while she looked. The third option came to her on the second day, when she was sitting in a coaching inn outside of Hertfordshire trying to make her tea last long enough to justify continuing to occupy the table, and she overheard 2 women talking about Dunmore Hall. "They say he hasn't hired a proper housekeeper since Mrs. Calloway left," one of the women said. "6 months now, and the house is run by that woman from the village who doesn't know the first thing about linen. What happened to Mrs. Calloway?" "Retired. She'd been there 30 years. Knew the family from before, knew the old Duke, even. But she's gone now, and Lord Haverford hasn't replaced her, and from what the butcher's boy says, the house is half undone." Audra set down her cup very carefully. Dunmore Hall. She knew the name. Everyone in the county knew the name. It was one of the great houses, older than most of the villages around it, set on 300 acres of parkland in the north of the county. The current Duke of Haverford, she recalled hearing his name. Lord Haverford, though she had never met him, was said to be a man of 30 or so, serious, not much given to society. The house was real, the need was apparently real, and she happened to have spent the first 18 years of her life watching her mother run a house not entirely unlike it. She did not think about it for very long. Thinking too long was how people talked themselves out of necessary things. She wrote the letter that evening and sent it before she could reconsider. She did not mention that her name was Pemfield. She had learned, in recent months, that names opened certain doors and closed others, and she did not yet know which kind this one would be. She signed it A. March, her mother's maiden name, her own middle name, both true enough. The reply came in 4 days, which was faster than she expected. It was brief and not especially warm, but it offered an interview, and that was enough. She arrived at Dunmore Hall on a gray October morning with her 2 trunks, and her case of books, and her very best composure, which was the thing she was most afraid of losing. The drive from the gate to the house took nearly 10 minutes, which gave her time to look at the grounds and understand, in a way she hadn't entirely when writing the letter, the scale of what she was proposing to manage. The house itself was older than it looked, or perhaps it looked exactly as old as it was. Gray stone, 4 stories, a formal garden on the south side that was still maintained, a kitchen garden visible behind the east wing that looked somewhat less so. The drive curved up to a wide entrance, and a woman was already standing at the door when the carriage stopped. "Miss March," the woman said. She was perhaps 50, with the careful expression of someone who had been doing a difficult job for a long time. "I'm Mrs. Tully. I've been managing things in the interim. His Grace asked me to show you in." Audra followed her through the entrance hall and tried not to look too carefully at the dust on the upper shelves of the cabinet near the stair, or the way the light from the east window fell on a floor that had not been properly polished in some time. She noted these things and said nothing about them. The Duke of Haverford was in his study. He was standing when she came in, which she had not expected. He was perhaps 32 or 33, taller than average, with dark hair and an expression that she could not immediately read. He did not look like a man who was difficult. Exactly. He looked like a man who was accustomed to things going as he had decided they should go, and who had not yet found a way to accept that they sometimes didn't. "Miss March," he said, "Your Grace." He looked at her for a moment with the sort of attention that was not impolite but was certainly thorough. She had the feeling, which she had felt before with certain people, that he was filing something away. "You have experience managing a household of this size?" he asked. "I have experience managing a household," she said. "The size is larger than what I have managed directly, but the principles are the same, and I am familiar with them." It was, she thought, the most careful arrangement of true things she had ever said in a single sentence. He asked her several more questions. About staff management, about linen inventories, about the organization of household accounts. She answered each one honestly, drawing on the years she had spent at her father's elbow while he taught her, half-jokingly, that a well-run house was its own kind of argument. At the end, he said, "The position is yours, if you want it. Mrs. Tully will show you the rooms." She said, "Thank you, Your Grace," in the steadiest voice she had. She did not feel steady, but she had learned that feeling and appearing were 2 entirely different things. Dunmore Hall in October was cold in the mornings and only slightly less cold by afternoon. Audra spent her first week doing nothing but learning the house. She walked every corridor. She opened every door she was permitted to open and noted the ones she was not. She introduced herself to the cook, a competent woman named Mrs. Fenn, who had opinions about the state of the pantry that she had been unable to share with anyone in 6 months, and was clearly relieved to have an audience. She spoke to the groundskeeper, a man named Tate, who did not say much, but whose expression suggested he was forming conclusions about her. She reviewed the household accounts, which were not quite in disorder but were close enough to disorder that she spent 3 evenings correcting them. She did not in that first week spend much time with the Duke. He was in the house. She was aware of him in the way you were aware of weather, not always present, but always a factor. He rode out in the mornings. He worked in his study until late. He ate dinner alone, which Mrs. Fenn told her he had done for years, though she said it in the tone of someone who found this more sad than sensible. On the 8th day, Audra went to the library to take inventory of the household records kept there and found him already in the room. He was standing at one of the shelves near the far window, reading something, and he did not look up immediately when she came in. She had almost decided to come back later when he said, without turning, "The records you're looking for are in the lower cabinet on the left." Mrs. Calloway kept them organized by year. She stopped. "Thank you, Your Grace." He turned then and looked at her with that same careful attention. "You've been redoing the accounts," he said. "They needed some correction. I noticed." He paused. "You've been here 8 days." "Yes." He said nothing further, but he looked at her for a moment longer than the conversation strictly required, and then he went back to his book. She found the records exactly where he said they would be. She was 3 weeks into the position when she found the letters. She had not been looking for them. She had been looking for a spare key to the East Wing linen cabinet, which Mrs. Tully believed was somewhere in the old housekeeper's storage room. A small, cluttered space off the back corridor that no one had properly sorted since Mrs. Calloway left. Audra had been working through a shelf of labeled tins and old inventory ledgers when she moved a wooden box to reach behind it and the lid slid off. The letters were inside. Perhaps 30 of them, bundled with ribbon that had gone brown with age. The handwriting on the topmost envelope was a woman's, fine and slanted, and the direction was written out in full. Lord Pemfield, Pemfield House, Hertfordshire. She sat down very slowly on the low stool behind her. Her father's name. Her father's house. She picked up the envelope and turned it over. The seal had been broken years ago. Inside was a single page, dated nearly 25 years before, written in the same fine hand as the direction. "My dear Henry, I am writing because I promised I would, and because I think you ought to know what I've decided. Dunmore will be mine to manage now, and I intend to do it properly. I know you think I was not made for it, but I believe I was. I only wanted to tell someone who would understand why it matters to me. Your friend always, Margaret, the old Duchess, the Duke's mother." Audra looked at the box of letters for a long moment without moving. Her father had known the Duchess of Haverford, had known her well enough to keep letters from her going back more than 2 decades. And those letters were here, in this house, in this storage room, which meant they had come with the Duchess when she arrived at Dunmore, or had been sent here at some point, or had been kept here by someone who thought they belonged to the house. She did not know what to do with this. She put the letters back in the box. She put the box exactly where she had found it. She took the linen key from the tin where it had, in fact, been sitting the entire time, and she went back to her work. She did not sleep well that night. She might have left it there. She was good at leaving things where they were when moving them would cost more than it was worth. But she could not stop thinking about it. And 4 days later, she went back. She read all of the letters. It took her most of an afternoon. Her father and the old Duchess had been friends since childhood. Their families had neighboring estates, she gathered, before the Duchess married and came north. The letters spanned nearly 30 years. They were not love letters. They were something quieter and more durable than that. Letters between 2 people who had known each other long enough to be honest. Her father wrote to her about the house, about the problems with the North Field, about Audra's mother when she was ill. The Duchess wrote to him about the Duke when he was a boy, about the difficulty of running an estate alone after the old Duke died, about the particular loneliness of having responsibility without company. The last letter was dated 7 years ago. It was in the Duchess's hand, but the writing was thinner than it had been in earlier letters, more careful, as if she was concentrating on each word. "I have not told Haverford about our friendship, Henry, because I was never entirely sure how to explain it. But I want him to know you. I think he would be better for knowing someone like you. I will tell him when I am better. If I am not better, well, There are things I have left in his keeping that I hope he will find. The Duchess had died the following year. Audra had heard that much from Mrs. Finn. She had been ill for some time, and then she had not been ill anymore. Audra sat in the storage room with the last letter in her hands for a long time. Things I have left in his keeping. She thought about the library. She thought about the portrait she had seen on her first walk through the house. An older portrait in the corridor near the east stair that she had assumed was a Haverford ancestor. She had not looked at it closely. She thought now that she should have. She looked at it that evening. It was a woman, painted perhaps 40 years ago, in the style of that period. Dark hair, arranged formally, a particular tilt to the head that Audra recognized, not from the portrait, but from somewhere else, from a photograph her father had kept on his desk, small and faded, of himself as a young man with a group of people she had never known well enough to ask about. She was standing in the corridor looking at the portrait when she heard footsteps on the stair behind her. She was a friend of your family's, I believe. She turned. The Duke was on the landing, one hand on the newel post, looking at the portrait, and nodded her. I beg your pardon, Your Grace. He looked at her then. The woman in the portrait. Her name was Edith Pemfield. She was the daughter of one of my grandmother's neighbors. My mother kept the portrait because she was fond of her. He paused. Pemfield, I believe that was the name, a family in Hertfordshire. Audra said nothing. He was watching her with that careful attention again. You know the name, he said. It was not a question. She was quiet for 3 full seconds. She counted them. It is my name, she said, my family's name. I used my mother's name when I applied for the position. I wasn't certain. I thought it might complicate things. The Duke was very still. Audra Pemfield, she said. Henry Pemfield was my father. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at the portrait. My mother spoke of your father, he said. She never introduced me. She said she intended to, when she was better. He paused. She was not better. I know, Audra said. I'm sorry. They stood in the corridor in silence for a moment. How long have you known? He asked. About the portrait? 4 days. About the letters in the storage room? 3 weeks. He turned back to her. The letters. They were in the housekeeper's storage room. I found them when I was looking for the linen key. She hesitated. I should have told you immediately. I didn't know how. Did you read them? Yes. He was quiet again. Not angry, she thought, or not only angry. Something more complicated than that. There is something in my study, he said finally. My mother left me a letter. I read it after she died, and then I put it away because there was no one to ask about it. He stopped. She mentioned your father. She asked me to find him when I was ready. She said he was the kind of man I should know. He looked at her directly. I was not ready for a long time, and by the time I was, I learned he had died. Audra's chest was very tight. 8 months ago, she said. I know. I sent a letter of condolence to the house. I don't know if it arrived. She thought about the 6 months after her father's death, the will, her uncle, the locks. It may have, she said. I don't know. Things were complicated after. Your uncle, he said. She looked at him. I made some inquiries, he said, and his voice was careful. After I learned your father had died, I wanted to know how the family was. The solicitor I spoke to mentioned some concerns about the will. I didn't know what had become of you. She did not know what to say to that. She had been in his house for 3 weeks as someone he had hired, and the whole time he had known. Or known enough to wonder. Except that he hadn't known it was her. He had only known that Henry Pemfield had a daughter. I am well, she said, which was the simplest true thing she could say. You are working as a housekeeper under a false name, he said. It was not unkind, it was just accurate. I am working, she said. The name was half false. My mother's name is my name too. She looked at the portrait of her grandmother. I didn't know what I would find here. I wasn't sure it would be anything. And now. She was quiet for a moment. Now I don't know what to do with what I've found." He was quiet too. Then, "Come to the study tomorrow morning. There are things I think you should see." There were 3 of them. A letter from his mother, addressed to the Duke personally. A small miniature painting, tucked inside the letter's envelope. And a deed. Audra sat across from him at the wide desk and looked at the deed for a long time before she understood what she was reading. It was for a property. Not Pemfield House, a smaller property, a cottage and 12 acres on the eastern edge of the Pemfield lands. Her father's name was on it, and beside it, in the margin, a note in the old Duchess's handwriting. "For Henry's daughter, when the time comes. I have asked Haverford to see to it." "My mother purchased it 20 years ago," the Duke said. "I didn't know what it was for until I read the letter. She bought it because your grandfather was thinking of selling it, and she didn't want it to leave the Pemfield family." He paused. "She put it in trust." "For me," Audra said. "For Henry's daughter." "Yes." She looked at the miniature. It was a small portrait, no larger than her palm, of a girl of perhaps 10, dark-haired, looking slightly to the left of the painter, with an expression that was not quite smiling, but was close to it. She turned it over. On the back, in the same fine hand she had been reading for weeks, "Audra, age 10, a Pemfield girl." Her father must have sent it to the Duchess. She did not remember sitting for it, but she had been 10. She didn't remember very much from 10. "She knew about me," Audra said. "She knew about you," the Duke agreed. "She called you a Pemfield girl in the letter as well," she said. He paused and looked down at the letter on the desk. "She said she hoped you had your father's stubbornness. She meant it as a compliment." Audra laughed. It came out before she could stop it, a real laugh, not a polite one. "He was stubborn," she said. "Absolutely stubborn." She said he was the most honest person she had ever known, the Duke said. She said he was one of perhaps 3 people in her life she had trusted without reservation. Audra looked down at the miniature in her hands, at herself at 10, before all of it, before the illness, before the will, before the locks and the trunks and the coaching in and the letter signed with half her own name. "I should have told you who I was," she said, "when I arrived." "You didn't know who I was," he said, "or what you would find here." Still, he agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "I am not going to ask you to leave. I want that understood." She looked up. "The position is yours if you want it," he said. "The property is yours, regardless. My solicitor can begin the transfer whenever you are ready." And he stopped, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked slightly uncertain. "My mother asked me to know your father. I was not in time for that. But I think, if you are willing, I would like to know you instead." She held the miniature carefully, the way you hold something small that has survived a long time by luck and intention. "She said your name was Haverford," Audra said, "in the letters, but she also said you preferred plain address." A brief pause. "Cormac," he said. "My name is Cormac. She mentioned you were difficult at 12, Audra said. He looked at her. "She told your father that?" In some detail. Something changed in his face. Not quite a smile, but close to it. The same angle the miniature had captured in her at 10, almost. "Then we are even," he said. "I know that you rearranged the entire household accounts in your first week and said nothing about it. They needed rearranging." "They did," he said. "I noticed." She did not go back to Pemfield House that autumn. There was nothing there for her now, or nothing she could get back yet. Her uncle was still in residence, and the legal question of the will was one her father's solicitor. Her solicitor, the one who had handled the family's affairs before Roland had replaced him, believed could be revisited, given time and a more thorough search for the original document. But that was a matter for spring. Maybe later. For now, she had the 12 acres her father hadn't known to protect, and a position in a house that was becoming, slowly and in small ways, less of an unknown place. She had the letters which Cormac, had given her to keep. She had the miniature, which she put on the small shelf above her writing table, in the housekeeper's sitting room, where she could see it in the mornings. She had, she thought, more than she had arrived with. On the first genuinely cold morning of November, when the frost was on the kitchen garden, and Mrs. Finn had made something warm for breakfast that involved more butter than was strictly practical, Audra walked through the east corridor on her way from the linen room to the main stair and stopped in front of the portrait again. Her grandmother, younger than Audra had ever seen her, painted in the formal style of a woman who had not yet learned how formal she was expected to be. Dark hair, that tilt. The Duke, Cormac, came around the corner from the library and stopped when he saw her there. "I think she looks like you," he said. Audra considered the portrait. "She was less practical," she said, "from what my father told me. My mother said she was fearless. My father said she was reckless." Audra tilted her head, matching the angle of the portrait without meaning to. "Maybe both." He stood beside her for a moment, looking at the portrait. He had a letter in his hand, something he'd been reading, and he had stopped mid-errand the same way she had. "My mother also said," he said, after a moment, "that she hoped that when I was ready to trust someone, I would find someone worth the effort." He paused. "I think she meant it specifically." Audra looked at the portrait for another second. Then she looked at him. "She planned a great deal," Audra said, "for someone who claimed she wasn't certain how things would go." "She was like that," he said, "very organized, under the appearance of uncertainty." "I know the feeling," Audra said. He looked at her. That careful attention, which she had stopped trying to read and had started, somewhere in the past 3 weeks, simply accepting. "I believe you do," he said. The frost was still on the garden outside. The corridor was cold, the way old houses were always cold in November, the chill coming up from the stone floors regardless of what you did about the fires. But there was light from the east window, the same light that had shown her the dusty shelves on her first morning, and it fell across the floor in a long, pale rectangle that reached almost to where they were standing. Almost. She thought about the 12 acres. She thought about her father's letters in a box, and the Duchess writing them out one by one over 30 years, and the miniature her father had sent, without knowing it would end up here, in this house, waiting for her to find it. She thought about the coaching inn, and the 2 women whose conversation she had overheard, and the letter she had written and sent before she could think better of it, signed with half her own name. Things had a way, her father used to say, of finding their proper place eventually. She had not believed him those last months. She had thought it was the kind of thing people said because the truth was worse. She was not entirely sure she believed him now, but she was beginning to think that the evidence was more complicated than she had given it credit for.